Are you being ripped off when booking your flights with a budget airline? Well, the answer is it depends on a lot of things, and not all of which I can possibly cover in this, what is hopefully going to be an under 10-minute video. Now, I could make like the CAA and do a 75-page review and analysis on many of the budget airlines and each of their terms and cross-reference those with consumer contract regulations and the Consumer Rights Act 2015 to determine whether those are fair. But I won't. I will try to keep this brief because it should be relatively straightforward. Because for you to understand it without having to read these documents, it really should be straightforward. And that, interestingly, is one of the points that might determine whether or not you're being quote-unquote ripped off. Now, for the avoidance of doubt and to avoid any defamation suits, I am not making any statement of fact that any airline is ripping anyone off dishonestly or doing anything dishonest in this video. I'm merely giving you some information with which to base your decisions as to whether or not to fly with said airline, because you may consider them unfair. Now, the reason for this video is I was sent an email by one of you guys to say that they personally felt that a specific charge on their bill was unfair. And I'm going to give my views on that in this video. But it's a bit more nuanced because I did some background reading and there's a little bit more to it. But first of all, if you're new to me and you don't know who I am waffling on to you, my name is Daniel Shensmith. I'm a barrister of England and Wales. I do somewhat specialise in consumer and civil law, as well as intellectual property and copyright and things like that. And so if you would appreciate these videos, I would appreciate you subscribing to my channel. So thank you for doing that. So let's look at this specific surcharge here. Now, I'm using this airline as the example because it was the one that was given to me. I think, from my cursory research, not that I use budget airlines to fly around, I don't fly around a lot to be fair, but anyway, my cursory research suggests that most of these airlines have these kind of fees attached, and the oversimplified explanation as to why that is because they try to keep things as lean as possible and they tag on fees wherever they can to incrementally increase the price of your ticket. At least that's my superficial understanding. So this particular story was actually brought up about 4 years ago, where Wizz Air was applying what they called an automated system surcharge fee, which, and here was the real kicker for the original story. The person that noticed it, that reported it to the media, in this case the Express, they said that they had a fee before they put their payment details in, and it took a larger amount of money. And when looking at the breakdown, there was this automated system surcharge fee, which was entirely unclear as to what that was for. Now, the response from Wizz Air, which I understand from the news article has been fixed, the issue was that it didn't display before payment because there was an ad blocker in place. Now, it was unclear from the article and to my research as to what the reasoning behind that was. Was the fee because they were using an ad blocker, or was the ad blocker blocking the fee because of the way that it popped up on the screen? Now, I'm not going to look at the code and try to analyze it and test it and that sort of stuff. Suffice to say that the article said that the ad blocker prevented it from being shown, for whatever the reason might be. Either way, it appeared on the bill afterwards. Now, that might be a technical glitch. It might turn out to be something unfair. I'll come back to that in a minute. But it did get me to looking at what on earth is this fee? Is it a real thing? So I looked at the Wizz Air full list of prices and all service fees. And sure enough, there's a whole lot of different fees in here, many of which seem perfectly reasonable. Some might think are unreasonable, but are there anyway. As a matter of law, they might not be unreasonable, but as I said, I'll come back to that in a minute. But here it is, that system surcharge fee, applicable to bookings made by automated systems. An automated system being a website or an app in this case, because, well, presumably the app as well, because it's an automated system. Much like you drive into a car park, it's automated, you put the fee in. You might have seen car parking apps that you pay on your phone. There's a 20p or 40p surcharge on the app because it's an automated processing system to pay for your parking. I begrudge paying the extra 20p, if I'm perfectly honest. If I can walk to the machine, I will exercise my legs and put the money in the machine and get a ticket that way, and good old cash. But if I can't and the machine's not working, etc., then I use the app and it costs me another 20p to do so. This is a similar kind of thing. It's a system surcharge fee applicable to these systems. Presumably, it's just to recoup all the costs that they have of running the website and etc. They don't run themselves. Certainly, good websites don't run themselves. I've spent enough on websites and servers and hosting in the past. But that's what it is. But the real question then is it unfair? Now, this entirely depends on A, how much it is, B, potentially what it's for, but most importantly, C, was it brought to your attention in the first place? Because if it wasn't brought to your attention in the first place and the fault lies with the website and the system, either deliberately or by accident, and then it appears on the bill, then in my view, that is probably unfair. If it's a extortionately large amount or for various reasons that might not be justified, then it might be deemed to be unfair. As it is, let's say that this issue with the website's been fixed and it does tell you what that fee is, and I'll come back to an example of that where I tested it in a minute. If it tells you what it is, it tells you you're going to be charged and that sort of stuff before you hit pay, and you've got a choice to hit pay or not hit pay and go with someone else, then it can't really be unfair because you've been told about it, you've been warned about it, they must have a reason for it. I mean, it can't be discriminatory, for example. It cannot say, well, because, let's take an example, it cannot say, because you're white, we're charging you an extra fee, or because you're Muslim, we're charging you an extra fee. It can't do that. That would be discriminatory, that would be wrong. And obviously, if it's wrong in law, they can't justify the fee. But this is an automated system fee. They're charging you for that reason. That's what it's for. If they tell you in advance that you're paying this fee, then it can't be unfair. You may think that it's unreasonable. That's different to being unfair. Unfair as a matter of law means they can't charge it. Just as if it's discriminatory as a matter of law, then they can't charge it. If something is illegal as a matter of law, then you can't sue somebody for it. You can't sue somebody for a breach of contract for supplying you with something illegal. Illicit substances. If they tell you that they're going to sell you one thing and they sell you another and it's wrong and you've paid them the money, you can't exactly take them to court because they've sold you the wrong thing, because the transaction was illegal in the first place. Not the case with these transaction fees here, these automated booking fees. So that, I'm sorry to say to some of you that might think it's entirely unreasonable, is not unfair and not unlawful as a matter of law, provided that it is brought to your attention beforehand. Which brings me to my little experiment, because if I come over to my screenshots here, I did an experiment with Wizz Air. And I had to log in with a dummy account and pretend I'm booking a flight to who knows where, because I've forgotten now. And the basic flight one-way ticket was £58.99. I went through the system trying to add nothing so far as possible. No, all the way through, and the most basic ticket all the way through insofar as I could. The one point that I got to, which I thought might render something a little bit unfair, was the one as follows. But before I tell you that, the broad summary of the CAA report was that, aside from the fact that they are not rule makers, they can only comment on things and so on, their broad summary was that these rules and these systems don't typically disadvantage the vast majority of people. And the vast majority of people go through the system, they know what they're getting, they know what they're buying, but there may be some people upon whom these charges have a significant and detrimental effect. So with that in mind, let's go through this. I went through hoping for the most basic flight possible, and it started out life at $58.99. The bit that I came to a point where I thought this might be going into the realms of being unfair, thus they shouldn't be doing it, and it might have repercussions later, which you might want to take a note of, is this bit here, where it asked me to choose my seat. Now, there was an obvious choice of choose a seat for this much money, which was the recommended option. There was another option which would have a rate, let me choose the seat, and it would tell me what price this one was or what price the other one was. Or the final one was choose seats later. Now, pausing for thought and just saying we are booking a flight from A to B. So I'm entering a contract to get me from point A to point B. But obviously I need to sit in a seat. Now, this option said choose seats later, and then says, if you don't choose your seats, they will be randomly allocated for you at the check-in. That's, I suppose, reasonable, because if you don't choose it, they'll choose it for you, and it will be random. Now, it then says they may become more expensive later. That, for me, is uncertain. Now, it really depends on A, the small print, and B, the range in price that this will differ in accordance with the small print. More expensive if it was ordinarily £5–10 to choose and allocate a seat, and it became £15–20, so it's a little bit more because you've got closer to the date, you haven't chosen your seats, and the availability, supply, demand, etc., the price of the seat has gone up slightly, then that might then be reasonable. If it jumped, for example, and I'm not saying Wizz Air does this, but this is just my random example here, if it jumped from, let's say, £16 a seat to £95 for that seat, or any seat that they allocate to you, I personally think that would be unreasonable, therefore unfair, therefore unenforceable. And so that example might bring this into the realms of being unfair and unenforceable. The next point says, one of the remaining seats will be assigned to you. Children will be seated next to their accompanying adult at no extra charge, which I think is fair. You'll be able to check out only 24 hours before departure. Again, I think that's fair. The one I think that there's potentially an issue with, now for what it's worth, I don't think this is likely to come into the realms of being unfair because I haven't looked at what the differential is between choosing seats later, what it would have cost you, for example. I think in this example was £16. In fact, I have a screenshot of the original one here. So this was offering me to choose the seat recommended by Wizz Air at £16. I knew I got £16 from somewhere. And I could then choose that, which was the recommended one, choose my seat in the middle option, which would give me a range of seats to choose from, which differed in price, or choose later. Now, if that 16 jumped to 23, for example, 24 hours before departure when I'm allowed to book the seat, then I think that's reasonable. It's a bit more, and, convenience and supply, demand, and all the rest of it, they will vary these prices somewhat. I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. I don't think that's unfair. If the 16 turned into 125, for example, I think that would be unfair, unreasonable, unenforceable. But let's carry on with my little experiment. So I went to the next page to click pay, and obviously presented me with a page for card details, and it said $67.99. Remembering, of course, that my original price was $58.99. And I did my level best to hit no, I don't want anything extra. I don't need any extra baggage. I don't need to check in early. I don't need drinks. I don't need whatever else it was offering me. It still took me from $58.99 to $67.99. Not a huge leap, but this was a relatively inexpensive flight. Imagine that this was now a £600–700 flight. I can imagine that that would be a little bit more of a differential. So then I went to the final page to actually go through and give me a breakdown as to what it was. My name, as you can see, is No here. And then I looked at the breakdown. Now, the first thing I noticed was that there was an administration fee of £8.10. And sure enough, a little bit further down under services, there's this system surcharge of £9. Now, administration fee could be anything to do with printing the tickets at the checkout or the services of getting you on the plane, whatever that might be, some kind of administration behind the scenes stuff, and the system surcharge. And presumably, again, that is running the website or the app or the payment system or whatever. I run websites and merchant accounts and all of this sort of stuff. I know there are fees attached to the back end of taking payments, running the website and all that sort of stuff. So that could be what it's for. It's not any clearer than that. It just says system surcharge. But it did at least tell me before I put in any payment details or anything like that. So it told me what these charges were. So in conclusion to that, whilst I might think that that's unreasonable, as a business owner, I can sort of understand it because these fees have to be recouped somehow. So to strip them down to the bare minimum, this is how they do it. They tell you what the fees are. So on one level, I'm not telling you to think that it's reasonable, but I'm just giving an explanation as to why it might be there, is on one understanding, it might be that they've stripped the fees down to the bare essentials, and then they tell you what these fees are. So it could be argued, if I were advocating for Wizz Air, that this system surcharge has been entirely transparent with you as to what the fees are. One's an administration fee, one is a system surcharge. The website does explain to some extent what this fee is. It just says applicable to bookings made by automated systems. So on one analysis, they are being entirely transparent with you. Ironic, given that the complaints that were made to the press were because those fees disappeared entirely, albeit it appears... To me, it appears that they weren't being shown because of the ad blocker. The ad blocker working somehow by stripping out code from a website to not display certain things, such as adverts, obviously. But in this case, stripped out it appears that it stripped out the bit that was telling them about the service charge. So in conclusion, I don't think those are unfair. I don't think they're unenforceable. They might seem unreasonable to some people, but there's a reason for them, therefore it can't be unreasonable. Unless the fee is so high that it can't possibly be for what they say it is, and therefore it's unreasonable. And as I say, the one that I think might come into that realm, potentially, depending on the price differential, maybe you'll let me know in the comments if you've had this, if you've had fees for seat booking that have jumped up massively when you book in 24 hours before. That might then turn out to be unfair. So that, in conclusion, is how you might be being ripped off by some of these airlines if they turned out to be unfair. For what it's worth, I think that's unlikely to be the case in the vast majority of people's fares, but it could happen. And in those cases that it does happen, I would expect these airlines to cooperate and settle the claim. I have, for what it's worth, for clients before now, had to go so far as filing proceedings against an airline for various things, and in my experience, they've settled those claims before they got to court. I've done some of them pro bono. In one of my pro bono cases, my client was permanently bound to an electric mobility chair. Obviously, he had to be moved into the aircraft to be seated, and then he was moved out of the aircraft and seated somewhere in the airport waiting to be reunited with his electric mobility chair. They forgot about him, they forgot about the chair. In fact, they lost the chair for several days. He was sitting in the airport in the same spot waiting for this chair to be returned to him. And when it was returned, it didn't work, it had been damaged, and this was just a terrible scenario. And so when airlines get these things wrong, they do get it catastrophically wrong. And that case, for the avoidance of doubt, was not with Wizz Air, it was with someone else. But I hope you found that useful. Do analyze these things when you get the bill and the breakdown, because if the fee for the seat booking has jumped, as I say, from 16 to 125 or something, I personally think that's unfair. And it might well be that a court would determine that to be unfair as well, because anything that is going to be such a detriment to the consumer should be flagged up prominently before you enter the contract. As it is, it does say that it might go up, and so it might go up, and that wouldn't make it unfair. If it were to go up tenfold, it should tell you this might be 10 times more. Leave me your thoughts, leave me your comments, make sure you do subscribe, please, and as always, thank you for watching.